There are countless videos and posts that report measurements of video game map size by scaling each world either in square kilometers or square miles. These infographics are nice to see, but hide a fundamental problem that makes them incomplete, telling only part of the full story. So how do you better measure open worlds to convey the true magnitude of video game worlds? First things first, roll the intro. It is no secret that open world video games come in all shapes and sizes, from the small island in Animal Crossing to entire galaxies in No Man's Sky. The variety in video game worlds is immense, and no game is like the next. You have sandboxes where everything can be changed as you please, worlds rich in lore and history that are ready to enchant you, and games that recreate reality and its complexities. The only thing that perhaps all open worlds have in common is that the surface where they lay can be measured in meters, and consequentially compared to others. According to some sources, GTA Vice City Miami is about 10 square kilometers, Zelda Breath of the Wild Hyrule 70, Just Cause Solis 1000, and Ubisoft's The Crew a whopping 5000. The more I look at these metrics, the more I'm shocked. The range of some of the video games I've played go from public parks to sovereign nations. Yet, for many games, the difference does not feel that abysmal as the reported land area would suggest. An RPG like Skyrim is reported to be around 37 square kilometers, while Just Cause 2 Panau is reported to be 1000. That's almost 30 times bigger, but it clearly does not feel like it. While I do not doubt the methodology used to measure the size of open worlds, even because for some titles it's as easy as to put 2 markers on the corner of the map and multiply the outcomes, I doubt the information that we're extrapolating from it. In other words, what's the point in measuring 2 open worlds if comparing the outcomes results in more questions than answers? This is a very tricky problem to tackle, because measuring by itself is purely objective. 100 kilometers are 100 kilometers, no matter when or where. But the context in any measurement is crucial. If I told you that one book had 200 pages and another one 400, that would tell you very little both about the book itself and how they are compared, regardless if the measurement of pages is correct. Now I know what you're thinking, and yes, I will discuss and elaborate upon the narrative that the density of things to do in a video game world is more important than the world itself, and perhaps make a predictable joke like size doesn't matter, it's how you use it. But I didn't title this video how to better measure open worlds, so I do need to come up with an answer to that question first. When measuring distances, the first thing that comes to mind is to use units like meters, kilometers, and nautical miles. Yet there is another way to measure distances, one that could convey better the magnitude of a video game world and function more efficiently as a comparison tool. It may sound odd at first, but that unit is time. Yes, you heard me right, time, as in seconds, minutes, and hours. But how? How do you measure distances with time? Let me explain. When you think of time being used as a unit of distance, you may think it's either nonsense or at the very least very impractical and convoluted. Yet some sports like Formula 1 and other driving categories use time to compare distances between drivers all the time, because it is deemed more useful, even if kilometers could theoretically also be used. Likewise, time is a much more useful tool to measure how big a world is, since it conveys much more information than distance. Sure, time is slightly more subjective since traversing a game world can fluctuate to varying conditions, but it has a greater potential to be more useful when it comes to visualize the true magnitude a world has. Just think about it, when you're playing a game and need to reach a certain destination for a quest, you don't sit down to calculate how much 6.427 miles are, you simply ride, drive or walk to the destination and you know roughly how much time it will take you to reach your objective. Subconsciously, you already use time to measure distances within video game worlds. To prove my thesis on why time is a better tool to measure open worlds, I have done the following experiment. In 30 different games, I traveled from the 2 further apart points on the map, usually from one of the top corners to the diagonal opposite bottom corner, and measured how much time it took me to do so, twice, to get some sort of average. Of course, in every game I chose the adequate method of transportation to move around. It is unreasonable to walk in games like Rage 2, since the player is never traversing long distances on the map on foot. The 6 methods of transportation I identified for my experiment are running, riding, driving a motorbike, driving a car, flying, and sailing. For some games I used more than one method, so it was possible to have more comparisons. After conducting as many experiments as possible with the games I own, I found way more than I bargained for. Before listing various examples, the overall trend I found is that the surface distance is very arbitrary. Sure, a game could be measured to be 5 times bigger than the next, but if the player has greater abilities and tools to traverse the world map faster, this difference in magnitude is not felt by the player. The opposite is also true. Games that have similar size may vary greatly when it comes to traversing the actual game world, because the world itself is built differently. As a consequence, if you merely compare size measured in square kilometers, you get a measurement that does not correspond in the actual time that takes the player to reach certain locations in game, thus making such comparison artificial. But let's make some examples. The Witcher 3 and Zelda Breath of the Wild are two games I love, and coincidentally I found from two different sources that Velem Novigrad and Hyrule are both 72 square kilometers. More shockingly, however, is that it took me on average 3 times more to traverse Hyrule with Epona than Novigrad with Rogue. I know that there are variables that could have affected my times then between the games, yet the gap is so great that we can learn much more about the structure and gameplay the two games have, despite the similar sizes. Still in Zelda, I was able to traverse from Cape Crestia to Icefall Foothills with my trusted motorbike in 16 minutes. Doing a similar trip on motorbike in just those 4 solis, from Acantilados to the southern Enchilades Isles, took me slightly more, about 20 minutes. Again, not all motorbikes are built the same, but to have fairly similar times intervals for games that are on different scales by a long shot is still impressive. Fallout New Vegas Mojave Desert was the game that took me the longest to traverse walking, around 21 minutes, while its sequel, Fallout 4's Commonwealth, took me about half the time. Guess the difference in sizes? That's right, nearly none. I'm fully aware that the movements in older Fallout games are stiffer than the new ones, but this only confirms my thesis that time works best to understand the player's perception of the world that surrounds them. Moving from land to sea, the two games that have main focus on sailing I have tested, Assassin's Creed Black Flag and Zelda Wind Waker, have reportedly a massive difference in sizes. The former estimated to be around 200 square kilometers, while the latter nearly 50, and potentially less. Time-wise, the two games clocked in at 14 and 10 minutes respectively, making the abysmal difference seem streamer than it actually is. Planes seem to be the only method of transportation that preserves proportionality between gaming worlds. Saint Rose Steelport took me a minute and a half to traverse, GTA 5's Los Santos 2 minutes and a half, and Just Cause 3 Medici Isles about 7. Of course, mathematically speaking, we could expect slightly different results from game worlds that are 15, 80 and 1000 square kilometers, but proportionality seems to have been kept. I could go with more examples, but I would like to reflect with you upon what these results mean and what we can derive from them. On screen I will display some other examples so you can see other interesting results, while I'll share some final fun facts about my experiment. The game that took me the least to traverse from end to end was Yakuza 0 at about 1 minute on foot, while the game that took me the longest was Ubisoft The Crew at 32 minutes with my trusted Lamborghini. The only game I was able to do both riding and driving was Zelda Breath of the Wild, but I think in the new Far Cry 6 that should also be possible. On average, planes were the fastest method of transportation, while running was the slowest. What a shocker. On some games, it is not possible to traverse the world perfectly diagonally. Sleeping Dogs Hong Kong, for instance, has only 2 roads that go towards the center of the map, but even those are of little use. As a final note, I recorded motorbikes and car time separately, thinking these two would give me noticeable differences, but in practice for most games it barely mattered. When I first saw all those game map size comparison videos, I had a gut feeling that while the concept of measuring and comparing world sizes was cool in principle, there was something that didn't quite match with reality. I knew that many games listed felt either bigger or smaller than the what reported, and sure enough, with my experiments I was able to prove this to be true. When we think of distances, we always think of the method of transportation attached to traversing such distances. In the fantasy world of Skyrim, the fastest thing there is to a vehicle is a horse, so it's implicit that traversing from one town to the other will take much more time than, for instance, driving from Silicon Valley to Oakland in Watch Dogs 2. This is no way a critique towards vehicles in games. Some games require the player to drive around the map, while in some others, walking will do just fine. But this fact highlights that games where the player can easily surpass 200 km an hour, the game needs to have a bigger open world, because as demonstrated, the player's perception of the world changes accordingly. Assassin's Creed Syndicate is not much bigger than Unity, surface-wise, but due to London's different architecture, it takes hookshots and carriages to move across more efficiently. Measuring worlds in time rather than meters has the advantage to make clearer how dense a world is. Kamurocho may take a little more than a minute to traverse, yet there are myriad of things to do in Tokyo, while riding across the Sahara in AC Origins may lead to dispersed points of interest to interact with. I'm not going to discuss the density of open worlds because I already did that, twice. But long story short, having time as a reference point makes it easier to understand the world structure the player is immersed in. Does my methodology have some drawbacks? Absolutely. The methodology of measuring worlds this way is approximative in nature, and there are no strict standards of what's allowed and what's not. However, I hope I gave you a new perspective and appreciation on game world design, and let me know how this methodology could be improved in further experiments. If you made it this far, I want to thank you 1 too many square kilometer times for watching today's video. I was waiting ages to carry out this experiment, and I'm very happy with the results I got from it. As always, don't forget to leave this video a like and subscribe for more. Let me know what's your hot take on the topic, and I will make sure to measure the time it takes me to reply. I wish you a wonderful day. Arrivederci.